Hello, and welcome back to the Fractional Typology Project. My name is Titakoshi. Today we're going to be covering Ladybug in the Enneagram system from Bullet Train. And beware, there are spoilers ahead. So, first thing, Ladybug's Enneagram votes. They are pretty decisively leaning 9. There's some votes for 7, but that's pretty much it. And there's not a lot of votes for 7. There's enough votes for 7 to count as an alternative in the way that I talked about it before in the introduction to the FTP video. By the way, if you haven't seen that video, I'm going to be talking about a lot of specifics about the Enneagram and about typology in general. If any of the terms in this video don't make sense, please refer back to my introduction to the FTP video, specifically the Enneagram section. We're going to be covering Enneagram 9 today, so that material is going to be very relevant. So Enneagram is about fundamental motivation. To let you see the slide here for a second. Ladybug's motivation. If we're going to figure out Ladybug's Enneagram, we need to ask, what is Ladybug's core fundamental motivation? And in my opinion, Ladybug's core fundamental motivation is about finding peace. Everything that Ladybug does is about finding peace. The food that he eats comforts him. His talks with Maria comfort him. He wants to form his own agency with people that don't suck so that he can have a more comfortable time. All he does is pursue peace with everybody. The tempting thing about the Berry philosophy that he psychologically integrates is that it allows him to make peace with everyone. That walls are an illusion and that, peace can be a thing maintained with everybody. And he finds that beautiful and profound and transformative. And so that's what he wants, fundamentally, a 9 motivation. You look at the votes, people see that, people agree. The real issue is the wing. So there's 2 wings for the 9, and I talk about this in the introduction to the FTP video. The 8 wing is pursuing peace in a blunt way, willing to, beat people up, control people, make them compliant to the peace that you're trying to create, which you might think that that's a self-contradictory thing, but it's not conflict for its own sake. It's not conflict for the sake of domination and control, but conflict in a way that brings things back to peace. Versus 9-wing 1 strives to bring peace through an organized and, I shouldn't say organized, a principled approach, that the 1 has standards for how things should and shouldn't be, and you pursue peace using that framework. Now, you compare these two. Really, the issue here is that Ladybug is... So the dynamic between 8 and the 1 wing is based a lot in common conceptualization on the conscientiousness of the underlying character. So Ladybug is unconscientious. Like if you look at his big 5 votes, 93.55% unstructured. He is a very disorganized individual. He relies on Maria to organize and focus him because his strengths are in his adaptability. They are not in his inherent organization and preparedness. And people generally stereotype that the 8 is a more unstructured way of creating peace, while 1 is a more structured and organized way of creating peace. So the kind of character that Ladybug is going to have a lot of people misattribute that. But to do that is, I think, to fundamentally misunderstand what the 8 and the 9 wing are actually about, because they're not about whether or not you pursue peace in an organized or unstructured way. They're about whether or not you pursue peace in a forceful way or a principled way. Do you use force to correct things, or do you rely on your principles? And if we go back, um, Ladybug clearly uses his principles over force. Not only is Ladybug a pacifist for most of the movie, he never attacks someone else. He always tries to talk things out. Um, he guides himself via his principles. That's why he doesn't take a gun. That's why he um, pursues the non-violent way of creating peace that he relates to, in the sense that the wolf, Tangerine, and the White Death are 8 leading characters, and Lemon and the Elder are 1 leading characters. It's pretty clear where Ladybug aligns himself to. So these are, a couple of fundamental issues. I'll let you read through them because these are both important. So the first thing is that Enneagram 9, to create peace, a lot of the language of Enneagram 9 talks about the suppression of your emotional landscape, the suppression of basically all emotion so that you can feel internal peace. And this clashes with the common pattern where IXFPs, like Ladybug, will seek out peace as their fundamental emotional goal. And this is not suppression, in my opinion. And I think this is a weakness of Core 9 as an element of language, because when Core 9 makes emotional peace fundamentally about suppression, it biases away from a certain psychological mode of being. And I think it's a real problem. It doesn't leave much room for that underlying psychological phenomena. And that's not good. There are absolutely type 9s that suppress any and all emotion in order to reach peace. But I don't think that's everyone that's seeking peace. And I think that it excludes these characters from the conversation and is an issue of the term itself. And yet, even with that, type 9 is clearly the best fit for a character like Ladybug, and so you can see how high its votes are. And as you can see, the 8 and 1 wing section talks about what I talked about before. This conflation with conscientiousness damages the truer meaning of the real division between the 8 and the 1 wing. And that's really not a problem with Enneagram as a language, and more so a problem with how it is conceptualized and utilized on the personality database. Ladybug has, auxiliary SE. He does a lot of fighting. It's tempting to think that, he pursues peace in a blunt way. But when you look into his character, he is the exact opposite. At every avenue, he avoids conflict and fighting. Nearly every death that he causes is accidental or retaliatory in such a way that is not the suppression or control of other people with 8 to create 9-esque peace. That's just not what happens. So that's a bit of the difficulty fundamentally with personality database in typing characters accurately when they do not reach the superficial, what I would call trait alignment. In order for a character to be voted definitively as their proper type, you need all of the deeper and superficial traits to align to community conceptualization. If part of that is off, much less likely to be typed correctly. And there's the SE and force that Ladybug is forced to participate in, I would say, makes typing that and properly understanding him as a 9-wing 1 harder. But nevertheless, I stand behind the idea that Ladybug is staunchly a 9-wing 1 and does not use force to create the peace that he's seeking. He actively avoids it. So going into dynamic analysis here, we could see that Ladybug is fundamentally seeking after peace, while Maria is seeking after, a head-type Enneagram control based on dominant SI to organize her environment in the way that she wants it to be. And this means that when Ladybug is pursuing peace or pursuing principle in a way that does not align with the mission as Maria views it and controls it to be, that leads to some conflicts. But nines are fundamentally agreeable. They want peace and they want to agree with other people in order to foster and continue peace. And so Maria gets what she wants. And I think she also recognizes that with patience and time, which she is very good at both of those things, Ladybug will see eye to eye with her and, do what she needs him to do. Ladybird is my consensus 4-wing 3 in the original introduction to the FTP video, and every time I want to say Lady B, like I end up going for Ladybird instead of Ladybug. So going to Lemon. Lemon is interesting because Lemon is, I think, very sympathetic to Ladybug's motives of peace and principle, being a 1-wing 9 himself. But he didn't believe that that's what Ladybug was actually after. The son died, and their briefcase disappeared. Lemon intuited, I think reasonably, that one agent was responsible for this because the Occam's razor would dictate that that's the truth. Why would there be two different people who did two different things when there could be one saboteur? How many saboteurs are likely to be on this single bullet train? Why would that make any sense? And so Lemon immediately and decisively puts him in the profile of the Diesel, of the person that's causing the problems. And because of that, he writes off who Ladybug fundamentally is. And then encounters some issues because he does that. Ladybug is searching for peace. Tangerine doesn't give a shit. Tangerine is about force. To the degree that Ladybug seeks peace is to the degree that Tangerine sees that as avoiding conflict. So it just pisses off Tangerine, and he views Ladybug as an annoyance. It's another reason that he views him as an annoyance. Now, the prince simultaneously takes advantage of Ladybug's peace-seeking nature as a 9-wing 1, while also fundamentally not understanding it and its core. So, to talk about the prince for a second, the prince is mostly voted as an ENXJ, which would imply that they have NI and that they can actively sort of read and understand and predict who people are and where they're coming at things from. I disagree with this interpretation and see the prince as an ENTP. They have schemes that they put people into, but their actual reads and manipulations of people are not based on the individual. The prince has a single manipulative button, and that is pretending to be the damsel in distress, pretending to be the helpless girl that she insecurely thinks people already think her to be. And so when the prince meets Ladybug, she does the same thing she did to Tangerine, the same thing she did to Lemon. She feeds them false information while, crying and being helpless and such. And this works on Ladybug because Ladybug fundamentally, agreeable kind of person that wants her to be okay, placed in that sort of moral principle. The problem, though, is that the prince doesn't actually comprehend why it works on Ladybug. The prince doesn't take the time to understand who Ladybug is as a person. The prince just tries to squarely put Ladybug in the scheme hole that she already made. Um, and Ladybug, she doesn't realize that Ladybug would never have done that because Ladybug does not do guns. Ladybug does not do gunfights. And so she doesn't realize her plan is a non-starter. And before that confrontation ever happens, the elder interrupts, and the boomslang interrupts, and so it never comes to fruition. Now, the elder is a one-wing 9, and the elder picks up that Ladybug as a 9-wing 1 has very compliant motives. And so they get along. They get along pretty quick and operate from a similar level of motivation. And unlike Lemon, the elder does not brush off Ladybug, but the elder also has no reason to do so. To give credit to Lemon, Lemon was under that Occam's razor assumption and needed to make a call as to, who this malicious party was and how malicious were they in the grand scheme of things. The elder does not have to deal with that. But I also think that the elder gets a read on who Ladybug is much quicker and much more adeptly than Lemon allows himself to. Lemon pretty immediately and squarely puts Ladybug in the Diesel role when he doesn't really belong there. And the White Death, again, doesn't care about Ladybug. So the thing about the White Death is the White Death is an ENTJ, and ENTJs think in terms of a larger enterprise. Unless Ladybug were actually important, the White Death doesn't care. And he thought he was important because he thought he was Carver. As soon as he realizes that he's not Carver, he does not care at all about Ladybug and what he prioritizes. Peace is also not a motive that the White Death comprehends or prioritizes whatsoever. To read off my slide here, he doesn't process Ladybug's peace-seeking nature whatsoever. If anything, he would view it as weakness if he made the time to comprehend it. The White Death's sun, the sun, is, in my opinion, an ISTP 9-wing 8. Or I might have said INTP 9-wing 8. But regardless, his sun is also a 9. Not in the sense of... Though I think suppression is a much more truthful depiction of the sun's motives instead of peace. But if the White Death views his own sun and his pursuits as weakness, then the more emotionally sensitive and emotionally in tune Ladybug would probably be considered even worse. So the White Death does not respect Ladybug enough to get to know him, let alone, if he did, he would not care for it. And then finally, these are examples of other 9-wing 1 characters. And you can see in this a decent range of different characters because, again, typology, these words mean different things depending on the character and the context. So, the principled... Let me say this. The principled nature of a character like Iroh and the way that is respected in Iroh's context is at odds with the way that juror number 2 in 12 Angry Men is represented as meek, agreeable, going along with whatever anyone else says. The traits of Chien Po as a sort of very agreeable, very calming presence are not leader-like in the way that Asgore Dreamer embodies. And yet when you dig into Asgore Dreamer, you see these same peace-seeking qualities, a fundamental agreeableness to the needs and desires of the kingdom as a whole. And so these characters are an interesting blend of compare and contrast. They are also, note, very few of them are actually aggressive. Like in the ways that Asgore is represented as aggressive in Undertale, this is undercut by the side stories and, Fluffy Buns narratives and such that, showcase him as a much more peaceful and agreeable person. Ladybug is an exception, as Ladybug is very much willing to be aggressive and also does not have the structure to create that counter impression of the One Wing. Compare and contrast that to Iroh, who is also willing to be aggressive, but comes at things from a much more, debatably INFJ, ENFJ, really probably INFJ perspective, where he's coming at that from an organized perspective and therefore much more likely to be typed by the community as a One Wing, regardless of the actual orientation between 1 and 8, because of that dynamic of typing it alongside the conscientiousness axis. And that's it. I forgot to put an end slide on this one, but yeah, that's about it. So hopefully you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.